Good afternoon and good evening, wherever you are, and welcome to today's webinar brought to you from the Global ESCO Network, broadcasting from Copenhagen. Today's webinar is about the Global ESCO Market Report 2025, and in a few minutes, Dr. Clara Camarasa, my good colleague here at the UNEP Copenhagen Climate Center, will present the report to you. My name is Søren Lütken. I'm the chairman of the Global ESCO Network. We are hosted by UNEP Copenhagen Climate Center. We are collaborating with the Efficiency Evaluation Organization for running the Global ESCO Network and promoting ESCO activities globally. Over the past few webinars, we have been introducing the second International ESCO Symposium in Istanbul on the 7th and 8th of May. As you will note, that date has now passed. We had the ESCO Symposium with about 200 ESCO professionals hosted by IODER in Istanbul on those days, and must admit we are still greatly impressed with the outcome of that symposium. We are still trying to come to our senses afterwards, after having had those 2 days in Istanbul with a lot of interaction with ESCO professionals, all experiencing. I think we had the same experience, all of us, that we really feel that the ESCO market, the ESCO concept and energy performance contracting is taking off now. We would like to keep that momentum, and we would like to illustrate also with today's webinar how things are moving forward on the ESCO agenda. With that basis in Istanbul, I think it's not difficult for us to keep our motivation for the Global ESCO Network and the work that we are doing. Our mission, as you will probably have heard many times, is to add to and reinforce the existing efforts of national and regional ESCO associations to promote increased activities by the ESCO industry, but at a global scale. We do that through ESCO associations and with ESCO associations, not to replace the activities, but to support wherever we can, to particularly improve the frameworks in which the ESCOs are operating. So we are promoting the development of policy and regulatory conditions to make ESCOs a thriving business. With the success of Istanbul, there is probably no surprise that we will be having a third International ESCO Symposium next year in October, so it will be a bit later next year than this. ANESE, the Spanish ESCO Association, has offered to host the next symposium, and we are very grateful for that. And of course, we hope to gather at least the same, not necessarily the same, but we have a lot of indications saying we'll see you next year in Madrid. So we are hoping to gather a lot of the 200 professionals we had in Istanbul, and of course you're all hereby invited to join us. We don't have the exact dates yet and the program, but we will be working on it, and you can follow that on the Global ESCO Network's website, as you can see here. At the symposium in Istanbul, we also launched the Global ESCO Market Report 2025, and it was Clara, my colleague, who presented it at the symposium in Turkey. And if you were not there, this is your chance to have more or less the same presentation, but with the added benefit of a Q&A session after the presentation, which will allow us to go a bit more in depth on the numbers and what's behind the numbers that Clara will be presenting. So without much further ado, I will hand over the microphone to Clara, but just make sure that you add your questions. There's a Q&A button somewhere on your page where you can type in your questions, and we will gather the questions and open the floor for discussion after Clara's presentation. So now, without further ado, I will hand over the microphone to Clara. Clara, the floor is yours.
So thank you so much, Søren, for this introduction, and also for giving me the opportunity of being part of the Global ESCO Network team, which is a fantastic team, thriving, really working to thrive the ESCO momentum worldwide. It's a pleasure to be here with you today. In this presentation, as Søren mentioned, I'll be sharing insights from the 2025 Global ESCO Market Report, highlighting where we are, what challenges remain, but most importantly, where the opportunities lie and how we can move forward together. Let's start by acknowledging the momentum we're in. We're now just 5 years away from 2030, the critical milestone from our climate commitment under the Paris Agreement. To stay within the 1.5-degree global warming pathway, the IPCC and UNEP emissions gap report tell us that we need to cut emissions nearly by half by the end of this decade. And this is not just ambitious, this is urgent. The challenge is, how do we reduce emissions quickly, cost effectively, and at scale? Well, the answer is often overlooked: energy efficiency. According to the International Energy Agency, or IEA, more than 40% of emission reductions needed by 2030 can come from energy efficiency measures. It's cheaper than new infrastructure and more resilient to market shocks. And this is where the ESCOs come in. As Søren explained, ESCOs are practical mechanisms to deliver these energy efficiency gains. They upgrade our buildings, they retrofit industrial processes, they optimize energy efficiency or energy systems, all with guaranteed performance. And crucially, they remove the upfront cost barriers by using energy savings to finance the investment. So in other words, ESCOs are not just service providers, they are enablers of national climate plans, and increasingly so, of corporate net zero pathways. Acknowledging this, at the Global ESCO Network and UNEP CCC, we've developed the Global ESCO Market Report to provide a comprehensive snapshot of the ESCO performance worldwide. In collaboration with the IEA, or International Energy Agency, we conducted a global survey with responses from over 25 countries, mostly from ESCO associations, ranging from mature countries or markets, such as the US and China, to emerging ecosystems across Africa, Asia, and Latin America. The report presents findings based on the responses collected from this survey, and it offers a unique window into what's working, identifies key bottlenecks, particularly in finance, and highlights where the greatest opportunities lie for scaling ESCOs. More than just a report, it delivers a high-resolution view of the ESCO landscape in 2025. So we invite you to download, read, and share the findings. Here in this slide, you have a QR code to the report, which will also be shown at the end of my presentation for you to get the link to the report. Now, let me share with you some of the key findings, and starting with the global market snapshot. When we look at the total investment in ESCOs, the data tells us that something is quite clear. The ESCO market is highly concentrated. The United States alone accounts for nearly 70% of the $15.7 billion invested globally in new ESCO projects last year. China adds another 15%. That's over 85% of the global ESCO investment concentrated in just 2 countries. Meanwhile, countries like Mexico, Mali, and Indonesia report fewer than 5 new projects each. So the gap is huge, but it signals opportunity. With the right policy, finance, and partnerships, we can unlock ESCOs in these emerging markets. Now let's have a look at another crucial parameter: energy and emissions. The chart in this slide shows reported energy savings from new ESCO projects expressed as a percentage of the baseline energy consumption. The United States leads with around 56% of energy savings. The United Kingdom follows at 38%, Most countries, as you can see, report savings of around 30%, and countries like Indonesia show significantly lower savings at just 5%. The key message is that integrated multi-measure ESCO projects, such as those implemented in the US and the UK, deliver substantially higher energy savings. And this underscores the importance of mature ESCO markets and robust, supported policy frameworks to support more comprehensive multi-measure ESCO projects. Now let's have an overview of current trends in national ESCO markets based on the number of projects, new activities, and market size across countries. Let's start with the most established and largest market globally, China, which dominates the ESCO space with over 2,400 projects, nearly 900 of them being new, and an impressive market value of $70 billion. Germany follows as a major player on the global ESCO landscape with a market size of $7 billion and a strong base of 500 projects. Countries like the UK, Taiwan, and South Korea represent another mature mid to large market, showing steady activity and high investment levels. For instance, the UK has 700 projects with a strong pipeline of new ones and a market size of approximately $700 million. We can categorize mid-sized markets as those that have sustained activity but are more moderate in scale, such as Belgium, Thailand, the Philippines, and Poland. These countries have between 70 to 100 projects each, with market sizes ranging from 85 to $300 million. Then we see a range of smaller and emerging markets, such as Turkey, Czech Republic, or Mexico, which are starting to build a momentum. And notably, Turkey, where the Global ESCO Symposium just took place, shows a promising growth of 52 new projects. It's also worth noting the case of Thailand, where 85 of its 100 projects that were reported in our survey are recent, suggesting a rapidly accelerating market. So in summary, we're seeing diverse levels of market maturity, but also clear signs of growth in newer ESCO markets. Let's now have a closer look at how ESCOs are operating on the ground. What types of projects are delivering, which sectors they're reaching, and what technologies they're deploying. First, on the project types, the survey shows a clear divide. Some markets are embracing deep integrated retrofits with comprehensive energy upgrades within a single project, mostly focused on the European Union and the US. Others, mostly in Asia and other non-mature markets, are sticking with simpler single technology fixes. And this matters. The more integrated the approach, the greater the savings and impact, but it also demands stronger technical and financial capacity. And that's not evenly distributed, as we can see in the survey results. Next is the sector engagement. We continue to see strong uptake in the public sector. In industry, particularly in places like Turkey, South Africa, and China, ESCOs are also gaining ground. However, the commercial sector shows some limited activity. And when it comes to the residential buildings and transport, the data is clear. There's a long way to go. And finally, technology trends. Lighting and HVAC systems are still the bread and butter of the ESCO portfolios, with smart controls increasingly at play. However, many impactful technologies like heat pumps, storage, and waste heat recovery are still marginal. What's striking also is the variation across countries. In some markets, motors and renewables are taking off in industry. In others, some technologies barely register. This tells us two things. One, ESCO model is adaptable, which is a positive thing. But two, we're not yet maximizing its potential. And in these slides, we see a comparative overview of the key financial parameters in ESCO project contracts across multiple countries, specifically contract duration, payback periods, and the interest rate, both for public and private sectors. And we can see a clear global trend here as well. Private sector contracts tend to be significantly shorter in duration compared to the public sector contracts. On average, private sector ESCO contracts last about 6.7 years, whereas public sector ones stretch into around 10 years. The same pattern holds for payback periods, averaging 4.6 years in the private sector versus 7.6 years in the public projects. The shorter time horizon likely reflects the shorter performance expectation, faster return on investment requirements, and a more dynamic investment climate. Let's now have a look at the few country examples. In the US, public ESCO contracts can reach up to 20 years, while private ones are capped to around 5 years, with similar short payback expectations of around 3 years. When we look at China, for instance, China follows a similar model with private contracts averaging 5 years, paybacks within 3 years, and relatively low interest rates, all indicators of a mature and confident ESCO market. On the other side of the spectrum, we see countries like Mexico, which face one of the highest financial costs, with interest rates close to 18.5% in both sectors, which, as we can imagine, is a major barrier to long-term contracts and investments. So as we can see, countries with higher volumes of private sector ESCO activity, such as the US, China, and Taiwan, also tend to display this pattern of shorter contracts and faster payback. This suggests a higher degree of market maturity, where investors are confident in the performance of energy-saving measures and where the private sector plays a more dominant role. So in conclusion, these financial trends underline a key challenge for scaling ESCO globally, or an opportunity, as we would like to see it, balancing the risk expectations of private investments with middle to long-term nature of energy efficiency returns. This is something we really need to focus. Where confidence and capital costs align, ESCO markets tend to thrive, as we have seen, especially for the private sector. Now, let's have a look at the financing landscape. Financing remains the bottleneck. Access to finance is the #1 barrier globally. In many countries, ESCOs rely on public funds or client capital. In others, commercial banks are starting to engage. But financial risk, and especially payment default, remains a huge concern. Innovative models like the one in India's partial risk sharing facility are working, but they're not yet the norm. In terms of the instruments, debt and project finance dominate, but instruments like guarantees, leasing, and forfeiting remain underutilized. We must scale these tools. The key takeaway when comparing the finance situation across the various ESCO markets is that market conditions matter, and strategies must be adapted to local financing realities to really make them work. Moving on to the policy and regulatory drivers, the figure in this slide highlights how important different types of target setting and related policies are for ESCO market growth. At the top, we see government energy efficiency policies and targets. These are seen as the most important driver, followed closely by clients' mandatory emission reduction targets and government climate policies. Other important drivers include mandatory energy audits and international climate targets, while ESG disclosure requirements, though still relevant, are rated slightly lower in comparison. Again, the message is unmistakable. Clear, enforceable targets, especially at the national level, are key to driving demand for ESCO services and thereby scaling energy efficiency markets. As I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, I do not want to focus only on the challenges, but rather on the opportunities that are right in front of us. One of the main opportunities lies on expanding the underserved sectors. Right now, most ESCO activity is concentrated in public buildings. That's a solid foundation, but we cannot stop there. Commercial and industrial sectors, where energy demand is high, remain significantly underserved. To unlock these sectors, we need to address key barriers, that is, the complexity of the projects, access to tailored finance, and business models that meet the needs of the private sectors as well. Second, we must promote integrated retrofits over single technologies. A piecemeal approach, just changing the lights or the HVACs, won't get us to net zero. Comprehensive retrofits may require more upfront costs, but they deliver better energy savings, better returns, and stronger alignment with our long-term climate goals. They also improve project bankability by creating a more robust business case. And third, we must use policy to unlock finance. This is where governments play a crucial, decisive role. Smart policies like guarantees, mandates, or blended public funding can lower risk and catalyze investment. They build lender confidence and bring private capital, which is what's needed, especially in markets that are risk averse or are still developing. And this brings us to the conclusions and key takeaways from the 2025 Global ESCO Market Report. First and foremost, ESCOs are essential for achieving energy efficiency and climate goals, but their effectiveness depends on a broader ecosystems, policy, finance, and technology deployment, which vary widely across regions. Most activity is still clustered in a few matured markets, but this imbalance is also an opportunity. Emerging markets hold a huge potential for development. Access to finance remains the top global challenge. Risk perception, limited instruments, and short contract horizon hold projects back in many instances, yet successful models exist and they need to have a broader replication and support. Next, integrated retrofits consistently deliver greater energy savings, but require stronger technical and financial capacity, which needs to be bridged. There's a clear gap between what's possible and what's common practice, and we need to address that. ESCOs are still mostly focused on public buildings, yet industrial, commercial, and supply-side applications offer major growth opportunities, but remain underdeveloped. And last but not least, the common thread across all the high-performance markets are clear mandates, long-term targets, and strong public programs which turn ambition into action. And with these key takeaways, let me turn now to you for a final call to action. To governments, make energy efficiency a national infrastructure priority, put in place enabling policies, and send clear, stable market signals. To finance or financial institutions, work with ESCOs to scale the performance-based finance. Let's make risk-sharing mechanism and blended finance the norm and not the exception. To ESCOs and their associations, keep pushing boundaries, keep sharing, learning, building trust, and the trust that really underpins every successful project. Keep doing what you do, keep believing in what you do. And to all of us working on the field, let's raise our collective ambition. Let's continue to make progress. And finally, to you, the audience of this webinar, download the report, share the insights, and help us strengthen the next round of data collection. The more accurate our market information is, the greater our availability to shape effective policy and mobilize finance. And with this call to action, I thank you all for your attention and thank you for being part of this global ESCO movement. And let's remember, efficiency first, everywhere and for everyone. Thank you again.
Many thanks, Clara, for this overview of the first Global Market Report for ESCO's 2025. I'm not sure whether we mentioned that in the very beginning, but we have built this report on the basis of a market analysis that we have been doing together with the IEA. So we thank also the IEA very much for the collaboration in bringing this to reality, to you out there. But not least, we also thank the ESCO associations that have been instrumental in bringing this information across to us and making it possible for us to make an overview of the ESCO market, the global ESCO market, as it stands, or as we can see it stands, because we are also very clear about this not being complete. It's not a complete picture. It is difficult to get the information extracted from the market. There are also confidentiality issues that we need to take care of. So there are limitations on what we can do, but I'm sure we can do better, and we will make an effort to improve this. This is the first report of what we hope to be a series, an annual event. And Clara, you can expect to be on screen next year when we have the 2026 report coming out, hopefully, with even more detail based on information that we are receiving from our ESCO associations. I think the important thing here is that if we want to promote the ESCO sector, we need to know where we are standing. We need to know what the barriers are, and we need to be able to document what we need in order to make ESCOs flourish. And we cannot do that without having a report like this. So for that reason, it's very important for us to collaborate with all of you out there to help us extract information from the market and present it in this way in our future reports. So we depend on you. We're sending back the information that you are providing basically to us, but in a structured way so that we have this market overview. We do have a number of questions from the audience. Let me just see where we are. I have an overview here, and that actually goes exactly to the point that I was making here, which is and the first question here is, how are ESCO markets evolving in those countries that are not featured in the report? And of course that is difficult to say because we don't have data from there. If we had data, we would present it. But Clara, do you have any good ideas about that?
That's a very good question, actually, and it speaks also to what we were mentioning, Søren, that indeed we need market information in order to inform policy, in order to inform financing institutions and other relevant stakeholders to promote ESCOs. However, it is not an easy task to collect that information. We've done, as you were mentioning, Søren, the first attempt to bring this forward, to make it in a structured way, and we have learned a lot of insights from there, but we also learned there's a long way to go to make sure that we gather much more information in relation to the ESCO market, and that then I will use as an excuse to hand over to the audiences and ask them to support us with the data collection. We make an open call to share with us. We will share our contacts, of course, and we'll be very open to any information, data, insights you could share with us with any of the countries or markets that have not been covered in the market report. And also for those that have been covered, we will also be keen to learn and hear from you. So that would be my answer, very much in line with you, Søren.
Thanks a lot, Clara. And maybe just to follow up on that, which countries in Africa were covered? And I know that Africa, as you also mentioned in the presentation, Africa is not well represented in the ESCO market, the global ESCO market in general, but which countries did we cover with the analysis in Africa?
We covered a number of countries, including Mali and South Africa, but we do need, we do understand that this is not the full overview of what's happening in Africa. So once again, we would be very happy to receive further data or information in for next year's market report.
And maybe in continuation of that, also, and maybe you have already answered, what are your views on ESCO market development in Africa in general? And are there any countries there which are advanced, other countries which other countries can learn from?
That's an excellent question. Would you like me to start, Søren? Because I know we were discussing this topic actually in Istanbul. Would you like to kickstart, or would you like me to do so?
No, go ahead. I can catch up on maybe my wishes afterwards.
Yes, exactly. I'll just make a brief introduction. So there is a lot of activity happening in Africa. At the moment, you have some countries such as Uganda, South Africa, Kenya, Mauritius that are really picking up. Mali, not to forget Mali with the World Bank funded project. There's many projects happening in Africa, and in some of these countries the activity is really picking up in the past couple of years, which is a very positive signal. However, there's, as I was mentioning in the presentation, there's still a long way to go, and there's still many barriers, especially when it comes to access to finance, that need to be overcome, particularly so for the African markets. So my colleagues from the Global ESCO Network are doing an excellent work for Mauritius as a sample case of what could be done to further upscale the ESCO market in Africa, and I'll hand over to you, Søren, for further details.
Yeah, well, it may be too early to say that Mauritius would be the place to learn from, but it's definitely a space to be watched, where we have a project with funding from Germany to establish a guarantee fund for energy performance contracting. And it's not that ESCOs are completely new in Mauritius. There are a couple, 2, 3 companies that have been offering energy performance contracts over the past, well, decade or so, maybe less. So it's not entirely nascent, but it's definitely something that can be improved. And as the country has a specific energy efficiency target and strategy, and even mandatory audits with mandatory implementation, there is a demand created by regulatory pressure, which we will, of course, be exploiting and hope that that will drive the demand for the ESCO services. Financing there, as Clara mentioned, is one of the main barriers for expanding the market, and we are then addressing with this guarantee exactly that barrier in order to increase the financing capacity of the ESCOs. As I said, we are still developing it, so we hope that we will be able to demonstrate a model that can be rolled out. At least that's our ambition. If it's successful, that we can roll it out in Africa first of all. We are in dialogue with the African Development Bank, not on this particular project specifically, but in general on ESCOs, and the African Development Bank's focus on the super ESCO approach, which we have other webinars on in our library that concerns, and there is one more coming up on super ESCOs in Canada in a couple of weeks. So the super ESCO model is one that the African Development Bank is trying to promote in Africa, in the African continent, in a few countries. Clara mentioned Kenya, where we know that they're promoting it. There is already an existing super ESCO approach in Morocco. So there are ESCO models, concepts, activities to learn from in Africa, but it is still generally an unexploited market that we hope we can help exploiting with the models that we're developing. Yes, more questions are coming in here. Are there any efforts in preparing comprehensive report on financing mechanisms for ESCO projects?
Shall I give it a
Will you answer or should I answer?
You answer, I follow up this time.
Okay, well, yes, there is. I mean, we are having at least ambitions on preparing a specific guide for ESCO financing for banks, because we feel very often that ESCOs, at least that's what we are hearing, that's what ESCOs are reporting, that when they go to the bank doesn't understand their business model. Energy performance contracting is foreign to them, and it's not the sort of the common asset that you are financing with a loan. So very often the bank would set requirements that ESCOs are not able to fulfill. So we think there is a need for banks to understand what an ESCO does and what an energy performance contract is. So yes, there is, and that's of course not the only challenge. It's not only the banks that are the barrier here. There are also other financing mechanisms that could be deployed, and in many cases, ESCOs are not even required to finance. It's not always an integrated part of an energy performance contract. But yes, we do have plans for as the question here is, a comprehensive report on financing of ESCOs. That is definitely in our plans. Now that is also identified as the key barrier. So another question here is, you said you rely on ESCOs for data for your report. Where can we send this information if we have value insights?
That's a very good question and always welcome. So what we will share here in the chat is the email of our center. So please, we encourage you to share any information, any insight, any relevant case study that you would have to us. That's very welcome. Thank you.
I don't know exactly who this question is coming from, but I was just wondering, Clara, if we could simply share the questionnaire that we've been using for the market report.
Yes.
Maybe I should say also that the data that we've been collecting, we will be collecting the data in the autumn. So the data for the next report will be collected in the autumn this year. So if whoever is asking here would be able to submit information that could be used in the coming report, it would be very welcome. So I'm sure if we send an email to Clara or me. Do we have the email addresses on the web? Otherwise, I have it on my presentation.
I can write it down.
You can write it down there. So send it to one of us, and we will make sure that we will share the questionnaire that we've been using for the report to collect information. And thank you for offering to provide information. So here's another question. What are the type of projects and contracts used in the public sector?
I think they're very much in line with what we have shared in the slide. Let me quickly go back to the slide to give an overview. 1 second, please. And we can take it from there. This said, you'll have much more details directly in the report. So I would encourage you to use the report wherever needed for further details. Just 1 second. So here you have a brief overview, again, much more detailed than in the report. But as you can see, one of the aspects we tried to analyze within the survey is this distinction, the distinction between private and public sector project when it comes to the type of projects, when it comes to the common contract duration, the payback times, and the interest rates also. That the interest rates were something that we were really keen on, also better understanding how do they differ between public and private sector projects. So here you see an overview, and in as much as I try to give like a more global analysis when I was presenting, in this slide as well as in the report, in a more detailed manner, you could go for each of the markets we've been analyzing and have a more specific overview of how they differ. I hope this is useful.
Thanks, Clara. Yeah, I think there is one point maybe in this regard, which is that in the public sector there is a particular difference between developed and developing countries, where in developed countries you will oftentimes see that ESCOs are not required to provide financing. So in the American market, for instance, which is almost fully driven by the public sector is providing the financing. It's not the ESCOs. If you go to Eastern Europe, for instance, you would see that ESCOs are really required to provide the financing because there is no existing financing available, except in those cases where there's EU funding. But otherwise, generally, the ESCOs are providing or required to provide the finance. So it depends a lot on the national context, what kind of contract that are offered in the public sector. There's another question here on beside the report on financing ESCOs, some kind of guideline for facilitating ESCO capital market would be welcome. And if you don't mind, Clara, I would make a small sort of reference to as a feature article in the market report, the ESCO Market Report 2025, which is specifically about how to bring the ESCO contracts into the capital market. It's written by Clara, who's an investment banker in Luxembourg, and he has brilliant ideas about how we can expand the financing capacity for ESCOs. It's a very interesting article. I strongly recommend that you have a look. It's of course one option, and there may be others, but this one is definitely an interesting read, and so I suggest you jump into the market report and find it there. UNDP Serbia is currently drafting projects on ESCO capital market with focus on innovative mechanisms. I think that's not a question, but there's a question for Clara coming after here, which is how can we overcome most of the barriers in Africa? Is there a particular model that could be adopted to help Africa key into this model? Over to you, Clara.
Thank you, Søren. I don't think there's one model that could serve all different markets. We have seen, based on our experience in working in different Africa countries and based also on this more global analysis, that indeed de-risking mechanisms seem to be crucial in the African context. That is an overarching, let's say, financing mechanism or response in the globe, let's say the whole region. However, when trying to adapt that to each of the countries, that will differ from country to country. It depends on how the financial institutions are set up in the country. It depends on the exact projects we're talking about. Is it, as we were seeing, right? Is it residential, not residential? Is it industrial? Is it supply side? What type of project we're talking about, and on that basis try to analyze, okay, what would be the most suitable financing instrument. So in as much as I would say that de-risking mechanisms are, let me know what you think, Søren, but universally valid in the African context. I think it would depend from market to market, and that's something maybe we will be able to see once the MAF project from Mauritius on the de-risking facility is done. What of those lessons learned could be replicated or upscaled in different or other countries in the region? But yeah, I would assume what needs to be tailored. Over to you, Søren. Let me know what you think about this question.
Yeah, but I think you're right that we in Africa, as well as most other developing countries, financing is the main barriers also for ESCOs. But maybe to qualify that answer a bit, if you look at the report and the data in the report, you would see that for all markets, also for ESCOs in developing countries, there's an indication of what the interest rate is for borrowing for ESCO contracts. And you would also see that in most markets, maybe with the exception of Mexico, as Clara mentioned, the premium on compared to the prime lending rate is not very high. So it's not that ESCOs are considered extremely risky, so therefore they are charged a very high interest rate on the loans that they are able to access. So the barrier is not there. The barrier is how much they can actually borrow. So until the limit, they are offered decent conditions, but there's simply a limit that they cannot pass, and that limit is constituted by their equity and their capital. They cannot normally use the assets that they are installing at their clients as collateral in lending operations. So that's why they very quickly come to an end of how far they can go, how many projects they can actually implement with the financing they can raise on the basis of their equity, if they cannot use the assets that they have installed under contracts with their clients as collateral. So that is what we need to address, and that is also what we are addressing with the guarantee that we are providing or suggesting to provide in Mauritius, that we're replacing that collateral which is missing, at least in the bank's perspective, to expand the ESCO's portfolio. So de-risking, as Clara said, I think that is really a key, even if you may not consider it a risk, really. So it's not that we're taking very risky projects and we're trying to de-risk them. We're simply addressing the structure of the energy performance contracting with a product which is designed to alleviate that collateral that is missing in the bank's view. So any insights on how financiers can connect with ESCOs? If finance is the number one barrier, how can they connect with ESCOs? Would you try, Clara, on that one?
Yes, happy to do so. I mean, indeed, so we know that the finance is consistently cited as the number one barrier when it comes to scaling up projects. I think one of the solutions is to build or to use national ESCO registries or platforms. We see, for example, and I'm going to follow up with the staying in Africa, right? For example, Kenya recently introduced a formal licensing of registry system for ESCOs, and that gives financiers the kind of more reliable, verified tool for energy service companies to work with. It gives it kind of removes part of that risk perception, at least, from the financier side. And yeah, if it doesn't exist in other regions, there is an opportunity to collaborate with local agencies, with stakeholders and other development partners to really create one. Another aspect I would highlight is probably better project preparation and standardization. This comes with doing more and more projects, of course, but many ESCO proposals sometimes don't meet the investment standards of the country or of the region, not because the projects are good in themselves, but because the documentation is not aligned with the expectations or the standards locally. So I think supporting with tools, supporting ESCOs with tools like standards, energy performance contracts, and other international accepted measurements and verification methods can really help support projects to make them more bankable. And it's something that we're starting to see in Mauritius, in Kenya, and how they're really building up tools and templates to support the ESCOs and the investors working on these ESCO projects. And related to this is also another kind of tool that we've seen that has worked quite nicely, which is the matchmaking platforms and events. In India, for instance, the ESL aggregates smaller projects and bundles them to really attract larger investment. And there is room to do similar things in other countries and regions where this is, the market is not as mature. And yeah, we've seen that that's quite an effective way to do it. So in short, or to summarize, if we want to move to promote these projects, we need to bridge the communication also. There's a communication aspect, there's a project structure gap also between the financiers and the ESCOs that needs to be worked on. And it's these tools that are, working on these gaps that need to put in place always, of course, taking into consideration the local context.
And let me echo that, for not for too long, because we only have 5 minutes left, and there's at least one more question on the list. But just to underscore the importance of standardization in this market, because it is complex, and to the extent that we can eliminate complexity with standards, we would help the sector in general, also in terms of financing. If you check out the Global ESCO Network's website, we have a tab called Policy Advice, which indicates a few elements that would be helpful for also for sort of reducing the perception of risk among the banks. And one of them is definitely, as Clara mentioned, the development of a standard contract or a few standards for contracts. We also have in our library standard contracts extracted from other markets, so there are standards to learn from on our website as well. So that is one. The other one would be standardization of the monitoring and verification approach. As mentioned at the beginning, we are collaborating with the Efficiency Evaluation Organization, which is hosting the IP MVP. So that is a standard that can be adopted for documenting the achievements through the EPC. So that is another area where standardization is really helpful. And of course, establishing a registry of ESCOs, so making them visible, and hopefully, ideally, a registry of ESCOs which is hosted by a public sector authority would be helpful in visibility of the ESCOs, and also for the banks to get a sort of a third-party verification of not only the existence of the ESCOs but also the performance of the ESCOs. That would also be very helpful. There's one more question which has gotten just in a very different area, but there was a slide which showed the savings percentages differences between countries, and US was very high, more than 50%, and Japan was very low with 10%. Can you explain the difference?
So thank you very much for the question. Let me better understand what slide we were referring to. Was it the overall market snapshot at the beginning?
Yeah, I think it was the one with the different saving percentages from countries, and most of them were about 30%, and then there was UK and US was very high, and then there was a few countries very low. Japan was 10%, I think.
Perfect, thank you. Yes, the slide on, I believe, energy and emissions, and indeed it was the energy savings as percentage of the baseline consumption. This is very much based on the data we collect. So this 10% representing Japan or any other percentage representing the countries was based on the information that the ESCO Association from Japan shared with us. The differences in the different percentages very much vary also on the type of project. So what we saw in Asia in general, but also in the case of Japan, is, as mentioned, there were very technology-specific interventions. Now, the danger when focusing on technology or single technology intervention is that the energy savings might not be as high as they could potentially be. And that's one of the reasons why we always advocate for multi-measure integrated ESCO projects, because there's where you reap the actual biggest benefits of the energy efficiency interventions be it in buildings or in any other aspects. And this is potentially one of the reasons why the energy savings in Japan was lower than in other countries, be it the US or some of the European countries, is because of this single technology approach. I don't remember exactly what technologies were being mostly implemented in Japan. I can check, or we can have a look at the report after this webinar. What I can already mention is that it was just one specific technology, which, as we know, is not enough to reach a higher energy savings.
And the time is up, and at the risk of being completely outdated in my last comment here on that question, I remember when back in the 90s, when they were discussing the Kyoto Protocol, and considering what would be a fair emissions reduction target for different countries. And there was a dispute between the US and Japan, where Japan was accusing or stating that while Japan is a tightly wrung towel, the US is a dripping wet one. So our starting point is different. That might well have been the case in the 90s. I don't know if that's still the case. But of course, there are different approaches to energy consumption in different countries, and therefore also different efficiency potentials in different countries. So that might also be at least a bit of the explanation. But I completely agree with Clara that we see in US that contracts are comprehensive, and they're also with a very, very long duration, I mean, sometimes 20, 30 years. And that is oftentimes simply not possible to have that kind of long-term contracts in Asia. So it could also be the possibility of or the lack of possibility for extended contracts in Asia that simply drives the focus on single technology solutions, which then do not achieve the full potential of efficiency. That's it for now. We are 2 minutes over time. First of all, thank you very much, Clara, for your presentation, and thank you to all of you out there for your questions. It's been interesting to have this discussion. We welcome you to join us next time at our webinar on, I think it's the 19th of June, on super ESCOs with a Canadian example. So thank you very much for joining us, and see you next time. Over and out from Copenhagen. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Søren. Thank you, Tripti. Thank you.